So, yeah, my name is Jack Tilbury. I'm currently doing my master's on blockchain technology in a South African university, looking at how blockchain can be used for real estate transactions as well as land registry and deed record keeping. Currently in my second year and should be finished hopefully by the end of 2019.
Oh, nice. And we also have Todd Miller from ChromaWay. Todd, could you say a few words about yourself and also about your background, maybe?
Sure, Jörgen. So I'm Todd Miller, as Jörgen mentioned, with ChromaWay also, but I'm based here in Washington, D.C. And actually, previous to ChromaWay, I was with Fannie Mae, which is the secondary market purchaser of U.S. mortgages. So came to ChromaWay with a strong interest in applying residential and commercial real estate solutions in the blockchain, and then been working on kind of building on the work that Jörgen did in Sweden and other projects that we've had in Australia and Canada and South America and some other places. So looking forward to the discussion.
So, and I'm Jörgen Modin. I'm the Chief Solutions Architect at ChromaWay. And for the last couple of years, one of the biggest projects I've been involved in for me has been as the technical project lead of the Swedish Land Registry and Blockchain project, which
yes, yeah, I've read about that.
Which is headed by Kairos Future otherwise, and a number of good partners in that company, including a number of banks in the Swedish Land Registry. Right, so because Jack actually contacted us with some questions, so we're going to try actually to make Jack be the program lead here. So feel free to ask any questions you want, Jack.
Perfect. Well, yeah, like you say, I see your project with the Swedish Land Registry. That's how I got into contact with you guys. And as far as I understand, just to get a bit of a background on that project, that was more of a pilot project to experiment the use of blockchain for land registry record keeping.
Yes, indeed it was. It's a pilot project. The Swedish Land Registry, I think they computerized massively in the 1990s, something like that. So they have rather good systems. They even have an entire spare system in another part of the country, which should be able to be online in 20 hours if need be. So this was indeed a pilot project.
Okay, I see. And was that pilot project looking more at blockchain to assist within real estate transactions themselves, or more from a database and record keeping system for title ownership?
It's the former. So we're actually not storing the titles on the blockchain. They're still stored by the land registry in their computer systems as they have.
Correct.
What we looked at instead is to secure the process of writing the contract. So we have a smart contracts technology called Esplix, and guides the parties through a preset workflow, which means that the different parties can act with more confidence when they can see the digital signature. So digital signatures have been around since the 1970s, maybe 80s. And that's not new. What's new with the blockchain is that you get one time and one context for each signature, which means you can trust that there aren't people promising other things that are in conflict with your property transaction.
Correct, I see. And as far as I'm aware, that Swedish Land Registry project was finalized last year with carrying out a transaction and actually showcasing it.
We did showcase it. A kind of a sticking point in Sweden is that you need a paper signature, and the European Union are trying to push everyone into using digital signatures, and they have a phrasing that a digital signature should be equivalent to paper signature, but real estate transactions are actually exempt from this rule. So we did one, but we will also have to do some paperwork in the background. So it was more a demo. Other countries, Norway, have gone farther in this case. I do understand, though, that there is a certain conservative approach here, because I think the courts and the governments and the lawmakers need to familiarize themselves with blockchain technology, because I can understand if you don't know anything, you might choose an inferior solution. Now, our solution is quite secure because we actually store on the blockchain the declarations of people, the digital signatures. We don't actually do the property transfer on the blockchain. We just collect the evidence for why a title transfer should be done.
Okay, I see. And you're right in saying that most of these transactions are demos, because when I look into blockchain-based real estate transactions, they are happening, which showcase the technology on blockchain, but they are also still happening the traditional way up until a stage where blockchain is regarded as the one legal way of doing transactions.
Yeah, you're gonna actually, maybe I can jump in there just to actually just echo what you said and extend it a bit. I mean, there's been a lot of, I guess, media focus around, putting title assets on a blockchain. But, as Jörgen said, I mean, I think the interesting thing is that for most land registries, particularly in the developed world, they mostly have trusted repositories of title and so forth. Now, where the challenge is, even in the developed world, in Western Europe and in North, in the U.S. and Canada and so forth, and some other parts of the world, is that the mechanism for transferring title or adding liens or modifying title or other types of property transactions is a bit of a black box, meaning that they're mostly carried out in paper. There might be a notary, a witness to that transaction at settlement or any other method by which two parties agree to a transfer. But the registry has really little view into that because it's primarily, even in the most developed countries, offline.
Correct.
So what's really interesting about blockchain and smart contract technology is providing a view into who signed those agreements, both the buyer and the seller. It could be the bank, whoever was part of the ecosystem. Because today, and you read this all the time, happening in Europe and other places, where, and here in the US, this happens on a monthly basis, where colluding buyers and sellers or notaries can defraud a land registry, or here in the United States, it's called the county recorder, can defraud them through fake documents, because all the registry has is what's been submitted to them. They have no way of validating those things. So that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, like you say, you're talking about the developed world. It's very dependent actually on where you are, because as far as I know, a system like the land registry system in Sweden currently today, it's secure, it's safe, you have guarantee that that is your title. But in terms of places like South Africa and in terms of places like Ghana and Nigeria, then this is where you have a bit more ambiguity when it comes to record keeping, especially with delicate things such as land and title deeds. I mean, there's lots of corruption that occurs, especially in Nigeria, especially in countries like Nigeria and Ghana, when it comes to not knowing 100% whether you are actually still in possession of your title deed and not having that guarantee from the state.
Yes, no question. In the developing world, in Africa, as you mentioned, or in South America and Asia, where
whenever you feel the need to. Okay, yeah. So what I was just saying was that I've got some questions which are actually pre-planned. So if you don't mind, I could get into those, and then you guys could jump in wherever you feel necessary to add input.
Yeah, please do.
Perfect. Okay, so the first one is quite general. It's in terms of how would you view the impact that blockchain technology has already had on the real estate sector, taking into account the challenges that come with the adoption of emerging technologies, when there's little governance and legal aspects of them?
Yeah, I can jump in and Jörgen might have some additional thoughts. I think you'd have to say it's very early, in the cycle, in the adoption cycle around blockchain. So, you would have to say the net impact is modest, but I would say at the same time that the interest and the discussions and dialogues have been, I think, quite impactful because we participate in both conferences at the World Bank on this topic and at other conferences around the world, in papers and other types of venues, and you really can't attend a land registry or real estate conference without there being a discussion around blockchain. So even the questions that blockchain asks, I think, has had a very positive effect on the industry, asking hard questions about security, about transparency, and about some of the other items that we've spoken about. So,
yeah, and I think it also puts into question almost. We have the GDPR in the European Union, the right to be forgotten, which sits a bit awkwardly with the blockchain, and that's highlighted now. And if you look at the right to be forgotten, the idea behind it is that there is a benevolent authority who will promise you that you have been forgotten. And I don't think that's true. I don't think you have been forgotten. What maybe you could say is that the evidence of your previous activities are inadmissible in court or something like that. But I believe that with the blockchain, people may realize that even if things aren't on the blockchain, they may still be stored somewhere. And the right to be forgotten might be transformed in the future, I think, to a question of how much data should be stored in the first place. So that's an interesting almost flashpoint now, or a point of contention between the right to be forgotten and blockchain technology.
Yes, I hear you. But like you were saying, Todd, so the discussion is very high, but also, there are lots of startups, there is lots of pilot studies going out, which I think brings a lot of awareness to the sector as well. So there's Proppy, who are based in California, who have made, I think, significant moves in using blockchain for real estate. You get startups such as Ubiquity. You guys at ChromaWay did your Swedish project. I know that there's been movement in countries such as Estonia and Georgia. So I think there is a real sense of awareness that's growing.
Yeah, there's no question. A lot of energy. There are a lot of startups in the area, and I think we're also maybe entering a phase of this, in that there's a lot of interest in tokenization of real estate. In partial, I think that's what Proppy and some of the other startup companies have been looking at also. But I think people will come at it from different angles. This is just, the Swedish project is one approach towards the problem, and there are a number of others that I think we'll see in the coming years. So.
Yes, definitely. That's actually one of my questions as well, which we can get to now, is the tokenization. So I just speak about how, blockchain represents the underlying technology, obviously, which cryptocurrency is one, but that is just one potential application. You can also start doing aspects such as tokenization of physical and real world assets through things such as asset-backed tokens. In your opinion, do you think tokenization of physical property can bring benefit to the real estate sector?
Yeah, I think so. It all boils down to if you trust the token, and you can, if it's on the blockchain, it should have higher. It should be higher evidence than any kind of paper contracts or anything outside of it. But if you do have that, I think you can get a higher liquidity, in the sense that you can do property transfers faster and more often than you would do normally, which means that there is more offers on the market over a given time period.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree with Jürgen's comment about, especially about the liquidity question, not only in terms of the ability to transact faster, get changes to title or ownership into the registry, but also the liquidity around these assets, because most real estate assets are illiquid, meaning that there's owners of a building and perhaps either it's paid off or they're paying some sort of a mortgage on it. But it's very difficult to be able to leverage that asset. And if you can, create fractionalized ownership, or if you can leverage that existing asset and make it tradable in a way, that opens up lots of opportunities, not only for current real estate investors, but a smaller investor who doesn't have $2 or $3 million to invest in a property, but just like we're seeing with cryptocurrencies, I can do a smaller portion of that.
Definitely, yeah. It now opens the door for those who typically wouldn't be investing in real estate to sort of branch out their portfolio and expand their portfolio. But when we talk about tokenization, the more I read and the more I hear about it, it almost seems as if tokenization is more applicable in terms of aspects such as fractional ownership to commercial real estate and, bigger real estate and bigger buildings. Do you think there's an opportunity for tokenization of residential real estate to assist in real estate transactions between people like me and you, the buyer and seller of homes that we're actually going to be living in, as opposed to commercial real estate, which is used more for work and used more as offices per se?
Yeah, I think there is. I think both on the commercial side and on the residential side, there's still a lot of regulatory issues around this, and that's been one of the main obstacles to greater adoption. But if you think about it on the residential side, if you have equity in a home that you're willing to tokenize, and that investors could participate in that equity, and as the value of your home grows, so does the value of their token. It's very doable. I think it's probably more like a scalability issue in terms of would you do one home or a basket of homes and so forth. I think it's the same notion, and I know there's some projects out there that people are sort of looking on the residential side. So.
Yeah, I hear you. Do you think there could be an option to eventually sort of have a tokenized title deed for residential real estate that represents ownership, or is that too far off?
It definitely seems off a little bit, though, because I think, again, as we mentioned before, I think government and locales are still getting comfortable with the blockchain concept, and a residential title is it's somebody's most it's a homeowner's most maybe important asset, and the concern about the security of that token. There's a whole other issues around public keys, and what if I lose my private key and I can't own that bearer asset, which is a house. And there are many solutions around that, but I think we're a little bit a ways from that. Just given the risk concerns and some of the regulatory questions right now. So.
Yes, definitely. I understand what you're saying.
I think the question of how you sign things, and now this is not a ChromaWay opinion as far as I know, but my personal opinion is that we're going to see community signed things that if you sign a transfer of something that has quite some value as your house, maybe it's stipulated in some rules that one of your next of kin or one of your friends will call you and ask, do you really mean to do this? So you just get some extra layer of security, because identity is very much, I think, a social construct. So with identity, and as soon as you go outside of Bitcoin and other on-chain currencies and you point at something outside of the blockchain, the concept of identity becomes very important. And so I think we'll see some creative and very deliberate signature schemes for that to increase the security. If you're talking about just storing titles directly on chain, that was not the question here, right?
No, I was more talking about just the tokenization of potentially representing a residential property through a token or through tokenization on the blockchain.
Okay.
Yeah, so that from what I've seen so far, so I've also been, spoke to someone who's quite involved with projects in Ghana and Nigeria in terms of trying to experiment and have a pilot study with land registry moving to a blockchain-based system. So obviously, when moving to a blockchain-based system for record keeping, now that to me comes across as blockchain as a database. Do you think there's an opportunity for blockchain to act as a database for record keeping without the use of cryptos and some sort of cryptocurrency incentive?
I think that a blockchain is a database, basically. That's what it is. And all information on it must be cryptographically signed. It doesn't need to be tokens. It can just be signed statements. So we look at the Swedish Land Registry project. We don't have tokens. We just have signed statements of somebody vouching for something to be true. And that can work really well, I think. And in countries that don't have very good record keeping, which I don't know exactly who they are, you would need to check that on a case-by-case basis. Then I think if you can get a very good record keeping, because a blockchain is basically a database, and its bookkeeping can be spread out on different nodes who are different to each other in such a way that a collusion is very unlikely. And then I think you can get kind of the same revolution that you could get with a mobile phone, in a way that you lift everything up to a technical level where there is easier to verify what's happening.
Yes, definitely. I would agree with you there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Jörgen's comment that one of the challenges, as you probably know, Jack, in the developing world is the ability to survey and collect those records, meaning that even if a national registry has a working database of title, only in many countries, less than 20% of the land has actually been titled because of the limitations of the registry to do the surveying and capturing of the geospatial information and so forth.
Yes, you're correct.
That's certainly been an obstacle in terms of the kind of ordering of technical development, is that the capability to sort of collect data at the local level. And again, maybe that's another opportunity around the blockchain space, because it's a decentralized technology. And there are a number of projects, and some that we work with. There's a NGO called Cadasta that's here in Washington, and they do local sort of decentralized land surveys. And they have a technology, handheld technology. They use GPS and drones and things like that. And that becomes a little more of a political issue, where will the central registry be willing to allow decentralized participants to capture land data and so forth?
Yes, definitely. But so in the case where blockchain is now acting, like you say, in the Swedish project to record the land registry, to have public witness that this did happen. Now, would something like that be a blockchain? Let's say you have a country that has digitized title deeds, okay, on some sort of e-filing system, but now they want to use blockchain to add security to that to those title deeds, would we then, well, could we then potentially see a blockchain-based system which is connected to that centralized digitized system, in which the blockchain-based system records a public hash? Because we don't want to be recording all the digital documents on the blockchain, because blockchain would then become too storage intensive and it would become too expensive to be storing documents. But storing a hash value of those documents could provide further security.
Well, if you look at the private blockchain system, like our post-chain system, it's actually not that expensive to store a lot of data on it. Actually, during the land registry project about, I think, a year ago or something like that, or 2 years ago, we talked about if we should have a distributed storage system for documents that don't need to be on the blockchain and just have their hashes as evidence on the blockchain. But in the end, if you need a redundant storage system, you're getting awfully close to the blockchain anyway. So I think our current approach is that, at least with a private blockchain on the post-chain platform or on the Chromia platform, you can store a lot of documents if you want to. And the underlying technology for post-chain and Chromia is the relational database. So you have a relational blockchain. That means that the transactions that go into the blockchain are the state of the blockchain is actually a number of tables in a relational database, which means it sits very well with a centralized database system, although it's not any more centralized. So the tables that are affected by the property transactions are then shared by all the nodes in the system, could be 7 or 15 or whatever, and that all the tables will be duplicated. So given, I think we're one of the few blockchains that actually have a true relational database underpinning. And relational databases are what underpins basically all land registries in the world and all corporate IT systems.
Okay.
Just to add to that, like, there was a project in Georgia where the Georgian registry performed the approach that you just described before, in terms of they did a hash of the titles, and then they anchored them in the Bitcoin blockchain.
Okay.
But that's a useful exercise in terms of, well, if there's a Russian invasion of Georgia, at least they can go and reconstruct the registry in some way, right? They knock over the national registry and so forth. But the limitation there is that now you've got sort of truth in two places, right? Because both the financial cost of the transaction cost of anchoring in Bitcoin, as well as the fact that now you're pushing data. You have a registry which has the state of the blockchain or the state of title, and then you've got the state of title in the Bitcoin blockchain. So you have sort of two separate sources of truth, which is something you're always trying to close the difference between. So just, again, one of the challenges with that approach.
Yes, I hear you. But then in terms of that approach, the benefits to me that I could see was that if you have a public hash on a public blockchain, at least now you have something that's publicly available to add a bit more security. Granted, you won't have a massive database with all the title deeds available to everyone, because we can't just make title deeds and land records available to everyone in the nation. But if you tie these to some sort of public blockchain, don't you think it adds a bit more security for people?
Yes, it does. And in Chromia, that's what we do. We do actually checkpoint into a public proof of work blockchain, such as Bitcoins. You're absolutely right. You need also to take care to construct something called a Merkle tree, so you can actually prove that your document is actually inside of that hash. Because if you don't do that, then if you lose some documents, you wouldn't not be able to prove anything. But I think you're right. I think there is a lot of value in checking into a public blockchain, although the public blockchains that are available today are maybe seen as slightly suspect by the authorities. So it's kind of interesting in a way that we do that, but we think it's good to combine their record-keeping abilities with the private blockchain systems.
Yes.
Again, I was going to say, just to circle back to the previous discussion we had around the mechanism that is used for getting the state of the title into the database or into the blockchain. Of course, if you're hashing, just doing hashes of the current registry, you're assuming that data is all correct or it hasn't been tampered with before you hash it. So that's why we're very big advocates of using processes with smart contracts and the blockchain in terms of the mechanisms used for transfers of title and so forth. So you're not only locking in to the blockchain what's in the registry, but you're also confident that the way it got into the registry is transparent.
Yes, I mean, it's very imperative to have the correct data at first. You're right. And that actually brings me to one of my next questions, which is pretty much exactly that, because I was just saying that once you have information on the blockchain, you can't change and alter this information. So it's very important that you have initial consensus and you have agreement that what's going onto the blockchain is actually correct, because especially more so in developing countries, you don't want these fake documents with false title deeds going onto the blockchain now being immutably secure, because then that's probably even worse than the current system. So it's very important to get the correct stuff onto the blockchain first. And I just wanted to see your thoughts on that as a challenge.
I don't think it's all that important. I think we will have to accept the fact that false claims will be made. But the important thing with the blockchain is that it can give clarity to the situation. So if corruption is done, then you can actually see that on the blockchain. You can see the collusion happening. I think there will always be one project we're thinking about that we talked about here in Sweden was we do have a lot of refugees here and from different parts of the world. And let's say that you need an interpreter who speaks, let's say, Pashtun, and we don't have one. And then we get a guy or girl coming in and say, hey, I'm an interpreter, I speak Pashtun. And they could just record that claim on the blockchain. But that doesn't mean that they are an interpreter. It just means that they claim they are. And then later they find the diploma and they scan it in and they link that transaction to the previous transaction, to the previous statement. And then somebody says, hey, I recognize this document format. I've seen his diploma, it's correct, and so on. So you're building a case on the blockchain.
True.
We also be working with the Green Assets Wallet, which is very much about having green projects with an environmental impact in countries where trust is somewhat limited sometimes. So the idea is that I don't think we should be too worried. We shouldn't, get bad stuff into the blockchain if we can avoid it. But there is also value to if somebody signs something that's clearly erroneous, well, it's on the blockchain. They can't back from that statement, and we might even be able to prosecute them for it.
True, definitely. It's like you're building a case, and I like that point as to building a case. At least, right or wrong, you have record now, and you can have a sense of traceability and audit trail to build your case and to see exactly where things may have gone wrong. So just actually going back to the previous point, sorry, something that I just read now and that just came up. So I was actually going to mention your post chain. You got that consortium database, which could work well for a smaller consortium. But in terms of distributed file storage, would you say that something like the IPFS, which is the interplanetary file system, could work well for distributed storage of actual documents? I mean, I've read a lot that says IPFS linked with the blockchain system could be something of a perfect match.
Well, there are some projects in that field. There's also Filecoin, which got $200 million in funding, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, which I think is basically some of the IPFS guys. And there are other projects in that field. But as I kind of referred to previously, if you already have a blockchain with good storage capacity, which we do have, having an auxiliary system, which also need a number of redundant computers, doesn't maybe you could have slightly fewer nodes in IPFS than, let's say, in postchain, but it's maybe a 30% storage gain or something like that. And is it worth that gain to have another thing in your technology stack? So, because if something is erased from the IPFS, yeah, you can have the hash, but you can't really prove anything because you don't have the original document anymore. So I think we're leaning towards that for many applications, you could actually store documents of quite some size directly on the blockchain, as long as it's a sharded blockchain. So it's not, of course, a global blockchain.
Yes. Well, you see, that's what I was going to say next. For something like Postchain, a consortium database, that may work well for, let's say, 1 to 150 nodes. But if you're now distributing documents across thousands and thousands of nodes, don't you think that becomes a bit much?
Well, a private blockchain doesn't have thousands of nodes. It has maybe, I don't know exactly, between, let's say, 6 and 20 maybe nodes. You can have thousands of observing nodes but they don't sign for it.
Okay.
And in the Bitcoin blockchain, obviously, you have one node, so to speak, or one miner that wins for every block, but who wins changes. Although it doesn't go between thousands of entities, there are a number of big miners that do all the bookkeeping, basically.
Yes, definitely. So I think what I'm getting to, which is actually quite a good point, I mean, I think something like Postchain and a consortium database could work well for current business processes involving a set amount of current stakeholders, whereby they just rather start using this blockchain system to conduct their business operations as opposed to the systems they're using currently, whereby through this private blockchain, albeit private, it's still a better and more secure system. You could now link the 7 or 8 parties who are involved within a real estate transaction onto this private chain using a consortium database.
Well, you could, but the absolutely, and much more. So the consortium runs the nodes. They just do that. They just supply notary function, and you could have thousands and tens of thousands and millions of companies using that blockchain and posting transactions to it. So the entities running the blockchain, the post chain in this case, are just notarizing it. But that's all. They just need to be seen as trusted. And with any blockchain, even proof of work blockchains, you actually in practice trust a number of actors and not that many. So you could have hundreds and thousands of companies using one private blockchain.
Yeah, just to echo Jürgen's comment that, I think there's a misnomer sometimes that, every participant in a blockchain network needs to host a node. And actually that's not the case. You only need a limited number of node hosts, but the other participants could be just clients. In fact, a notary or an attorney or buyers and sellers or banks, they're using their client technology, a smartphone like we use in Sweden, or desktop applications, and the blockchain is really just plumbing to them. It's how to move data around the network. They don't need to be a full sort of validator of the transactions, right? They just might be a submitter to it, a signer of it.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, with blockchain now sort of plugging into those systems, it could provide different access rights, like you're saying. So certain people might have read access rights, view access rights. And I think, like you say, there could be a lot of people who are confused about that aspect. But the aspects of different access in terms of what you can do and what you can't, I think could be very useful and will be very useful.
Sure.
And then in terms of, so I've got 2 more questions. In terms of smart contracts, so I've been looking at smart contracts and the increased transparency and security and automation they provide. How do you view the opportunities that smart contracts could bring to real estate transactions, especially when you compare them to current methods that are currently used and so paper-based and so paper-intensive?
I think they make the process discovery like when we looked at the Swedish Land Registry project, I think we made out 36 steps or something leading up to a property transfer. And I think down to 7 or something like that towards the end. And you get what I would call trust discovery. So if somebody signs something on a paper, you may not be sure about the context, or somebody else has signed another document, or when was this actually signed. But by using client-side smart contracts that we've been using in the Swedish Land Registry project, a technology called SPLIX, you actually take a signature and you put it into a context of previous signatures in that business workflow. And that means that you can act with more confidence and faster. And you get steward into the correct workflow. So you will probably get the number of standard workflows, standard smart contracts that people go through, and you might even get a trust rating for them or a record of how they've been faring. So you could say that this smart contract has been used in 10,000 property transfers, and very few of these have ever gone to court. And then people will gravitate towards that smart contract to solve these problems.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, I think smart contracts could help expediting the process through things such as performing escrow services and really enhancing the automation and bringing more security to parties involved.
Indeed. And this also becomes the start of an ecosystem. So if a smart contract is underway, optionally other parties may see this and say, hey, I'm selling a property in Africa, and I would like to get I would soon get some money from that, as you can see. Can you give me a promise of a mortgage in Sweden, given the fact that I'm selling? So, and then they can condition that promise on the other smart contract going through. So if you look at the contract workflow in the Swedish Land Registry project, everyone is basically vouching for something if the following steps also go through. So you condition your signature on other people doing their part, which can be quite powerful, I believe.
And plus the addition of, I mean, you're essentially sort of codifying the local or national regulation into the contracts, because every mortgage process or land titling process is regulated by a national or local government, and you are, you're enforcing through the contract that regulation, because you're actually writing it into the code that here are, you need notary witnesses, or you need to have this document signed, or you need to have this data. Today, it's usually done through a QA process that happens after the fact. But if you can build the review or the audit process into the smart contract itself, it gives you all kinds of benefits in terms of the outcomes and the credibility of them.
True. And something I've heard people say, which I'm also on the fence a bit about now, is that obviously if you start going towards new business models using blockchain and using the smart contracts that you just spoke of, Todd, if you're now codifying the legal and regulatory terms of a real estate transaction, what impact does this start to have on conveyancers and attorneys? My view is that it could not eradicate them straight away, but it could start to reshape and restructure their role, because now we're looking at needing someone to codify a smart contract, but also someone to know the legal regulations of that nation for a real estate transaction.
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's, I think you would still want the attorney's value add role of reviewing the contract. And if it's in a smart contract format, this is going to require that attorneys are more comfortable with, reviewing code and having, more of a sort of technical competency, or at least being able to partner with others who have that. But the maybe the traditional role of a settlement attorney and so forth would change, because the system itself has the logic to produce the tasks required in a property transfer and to coordinate those digitally. So, here in the States, we have most closings are at a settlement table where buyers and sellers, settlement attorneys, real estate brokers are physically face to face with each other, signing documents and, adding the critical data. That probably won't be needed in the future as we move forward. So.
Yes, definitely. And then I suppose with things such as if smart contracts are now starting to replace escrow services, that also potentially might not be needed in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you would still want some sort of an escrow service, but it's how that escrow service is accessed, right? So the contract itself might request, escrow be set aside with a financial institution and so forth. So it sort of becomes part of the contract and of the ecosystem to fulfill that service.
Yes, I hear you. And something I've seen though is that I think so. Like you said, Jörgen, there's about 36 steps in Sweden before a transaction goes through. In South Africa, there are 25 physical documents needed throughout a transaction. Okay, and that's just per one transaction. There are around 12 to 17 stakeholders and people involved. But I think once we start using aspects such as blockchain and automation through smart contracts, I also think that could open the door for these people who are currently involved in a lot of manual and paper-based and paper-pushing processes that are needed by law. If these processes are now become automated, this could open up the door for these professional services to start adding more value in more important areas.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're seeing an interlinking of business with blockchains, that you get a wider reach, because basically in business, I mean, or any field, you do only trust the people you know in a way, and with blockchains you can see what activity they do, and you can maybe start trusting their business partners, and you can trust certain processes that you believe in. So yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, I wanted to just show an example there. We worked in New South Wales in Australia with the land registry there. And one of the recommendations we made is that, for example, they sell data to data vendors. Could be, credit providers or other title-related information providers and so forth. And they spend a lot of money building APIs and shipping data to these providers based on subscriptions and so forth. So one thing we discussed with them is you can have on a subscription basis, you can have them stand up a node which doesn't replicate, it's the same state of the data of your title database. And they, instead of having to support them, they can have the data themselves. It may only be it's read only. They can't write to that database. But it opens up new ways for the registries to think about their business model instead of trying to protect it from any outside access and sort of controlling it, from every vantage point. They can securely share it, and there's new business and revenue models for them to think about because of that.
Yes, definitely. I agree with what you're saying there. And then that actually brings us to my last question. This has been great so far, guys. I really appreciate it. So my last question just basically speaks about the fact that, you know, there are blockchain-based real estate startups entering the space. There is a lot of talk when it comes to blockchain and real estate. There's a lot of interest moving towards these new business models. But for blockchain-based business processes entering the real estate sector, whether it be on the transaction side itself and the smart contracts of automation, or whether it be on the recording of ownership and deeds side, where do you believe immediate technological intervention is needed within real estate? Are there any specific areas that you think are needing technological intervention?
So just to clarify the question, what areas around real estate could benefit from this sort of information and so forth?
Yes, I'm just basically saying what areas around real estate, when it comes to either transactions or real estate title ownership record keeping, what areas do you believe need good technological intervention with technologies such as blockchain? Are there certain areas such as due diligence or such as title recording that you believe could benefit from the technology more than others?
Well, if I can try to take a stab at this, I think it's first one has to define the owner of problem, like for whom is something a problem today. As far as I understand, and I think Todd knows more about this than I do, but in some countries there isn't. I think Todd mentioned a percentage here of how much land was not really titled in a way that you knew. So a lack of clarity about ownership means it's hard to provide security or collateral for a loan or other kinds of business activity, which means a country that doesn't have a good, because basically that's the basics of a lot of loans and security. That's real estate and land, because everything else you can lift up and walk away with or hide or something like that. So I think if you look at it like a macro level on the GDP of a country, it wouldn't surprise me if a country that has poor practices in this area today, if we can get the land titles to be clear, and if we can bring clarity to more percentage of the land, that ought to have a very tangible effect on the national GDP. And we know from experience that if the national GDP rises, it also helps the poorest people. If you look at how they fared. So that could be one aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, again, just echo Jörgen's comments. I mean, such a small percentage of land in the developing world is actually is registered, and therefore the ability to leverage that to raise capital, you know, is very limited and so forth. So, you know, in the developing world, like sort of using these blockchain and related technology to jump over this great chasm around private land would seem to be a priority. I mean, you could think of the way the smartphone helped, you know, leap many countries to in the sort of communication area. This seems to be an opportunity for the developing world to kind of jump forward in this space. So.
True, definitely. Do you think there's more of an opportunity for blockchain in terms of commercial real estate as opposed to residential real estate?
I think one concept with commercial real estate is that you could also probably hook the blockchain up to access control mechanisms. So we have the Uberization of things here in Stockholm. There are electrical kick bikes everywhere that you can rent by the minute, actually. And I think that for the commercial real estate, we already have the idea of shared usage that could be one option.
Okay, I hear you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think commercial real estate, I mean, there's already much more activity with regard to tokenization on the commercial side and so forth. I think mostly because of the, it's an investment class. So real estate investors, existing real estate investors, and other sort of asset managers are looking for, secure opportunities to invest in real estate, and this could provide one.
Definitely. I think in terms of the residential real estate side, I think, at least my view, where blockchain could significantly assist would be with things such as title and record keeping of title and ownership, as opposed to more so on the transaction side.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, there are a number of projects going on, and you read these all the time where a purchaser used cryptocurrency to buy a condo in New York or something. So you could see that on the sort of transaction side on sort of residential real estate, that it may be an easier way to transfer money. It could open up for sort of real estate brokers and property developers to open up their sort of the opportunity for purchasers in different countries to have, secure payments and so forth.
True.
So
I think something that the real estate industry in terms of residential transactions is going to have to move towards first, especially in South Africa, is just digitization itself. There's so many physical documents and paper-based documents needed and physical signatures needed. I think we need to first move to digitized systems that allow digital signatures and electronic signatures, just to hamp down on all these paper-based processes that are currently in place.
no doubt. I mean, that's definitely one of the challenges I'm sure Jörgen can talk about. I mean, he referenced before the challenge with digital signatures in Sweden, and agreeing to an identity solution. Some countries are ahead of that further than others, but it's certainly fundamental to a blockchain solution on having a clear identity mechanism. So,
yeah, I think talking about more commercial things, but I think that smaller and medium-sized companies will have an advantage over enterprises with the blockchain. Enterprises today are we like them because we can trust them, because they are big enough to absorb problems. But with the blockchain, you could have, and this is my own thinking, you could have insurance companies coming in, hooking into the blockchain and shield people from certain things. They will make an analysis themselves of the situation in a smart contract or in any other kind of transaction and say, hey, we're absorbing the risk here. So we might see a partitioning of big enterprises into an insurance part, and the other part will be farmed out or taken over, rather, by smaller and medium-sized companies who coordinate their business activities and their trust through the blockchain.
Definitely. I like that insight. And on that note, I would just like to say those are all my questions. So I've really appreciated this chat and you guys coming out here and taking the time to speak to me. Jörgen, I'm not sure whether there's anything you'd like to say in closing out.
I'm good, actually. I would like to thank you, Jack, for participating in this podcast format. It's very generous of you. And I would like to thank you, Todd, as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. It was we covered a wide range of topics, and I think others will enjoy listening in, and we can chat more about some of the logistics of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd just like to say thank you to the both of you as well. I think it's good to know that research is going on around the world in all these areas, and it's good to know that the conversation is still being had. So I'd just like to thank you guys for your time.